Hey, I can talk, sort of. I've been sick for the last week or so. Anyway, I want to get started with the E85 experiment in my E46 BMW. And just to be clear, it is an experiment. This is not a tutorial, and it is not a recommendation. Actually, I would recommend you not try what I'm going to do in this video because there is some risk involved. And I'll talk about that in a second. Now, for those who don't know, E85 is a fuel that is mostly ethanol. Actually, the 85 stands for 85% ethanol, and the E stands for ethanol. The other 15% is gasoline. Now, with that said, E85 is not always 85% ethanol. If I remember correctly, it can be as little as 55% ethanol and still be legally considered E85. So for example, in the winter, the ethanol content will probably go down so that your engine will be easier to start in cold weather. Now, here in Florida, we don't get winter fuel, ever. So our E85 is probably going to be near or at 85% ethanol all the time. Now, the ethanol content matters because ethanol has a different stoichiometric ratio than gasoline. For those who don't know, the stoichiometric ratio is the theoretical perfect burn, where all of the oxygen in the air and all of the fuel is all used up. Now, engines don't always want the perfect burn. Sometimes they want a little bit lean or a little bit rich. That's a subject for another story. But anyway, the ethanol and the gasoline have different stoichiometric ratios, which means that you need to inject a different amount of fuel into your engine with E85. I believe the rule of thumb is that with E85 you need about 30 or 40% more fuel than gasoline. So these injectors that I picked up are about 30% bigger than stock. Or I should say they flow about 30% more than the stock injectors on my engine. That's kind of important because I don't think my stock injectors will be able to flow 30% more fuel, especially under heavy load like wide open throttle or if you're accelerating briskly. If your engine runs lean because your injectors simply cannot inject enough fuel, bad things are going to happen. Also, ethanol burns slower than gasoline, so we're going to have to adjust the ignition timing in the tune, and that's what the laptop is for. We have Tuner Pro loaded up, and we can adjust the timing maps in the ECU. Okay, so at this point you may be wondering, why run E85 in a stock naturally aspirated engine? That's a good question. Usually the reason people would run E85 in an engine would be if they're running high compression or if they're running boost and they want the knock resistance. Of course, I'm not doing that, at least not yet. But I do plan to be running boost on this engine sometime in the near future, and since I don't have a lot of experience tuning with E85, I would like to get familiar with that before the engine is boosted. So hopefully the learning curve won't be quite as steep. Okay, enough talking, let's get to work. Basically what we're going to do is, first of all, I'm going to install the injectors. Second of all, I'm going to install the tune. And third of all, I'm going to put some E85 in the tank and purge the regular gasoline out of the fuel system. So, let's get started. Okay, first I'm going to remove the PCV breather hose. I have a couple fasteners attaching it to the intake manifold. And hello airplane. And I'm also using the stock CCV elbow to connect it to the valve cover. In case you don't know, you see this little serrated part on here. There's another one on the other side, and you just squeeze them to make it come loose, and then you just pull it off. Okay, the breather hose is out of the way, and I decided I'm also going to remove the cabin filter housing because that's probably going to make my life easier. It only has 4 bolts, and they're all Torx T30. Okay, that's better. Yeah, that'll make my life easier. Anyway, the next step will be to remove the injector harness. Of course, it has a connection for each fuel injector, but also it's got a couple other things going on. For example, it's got this pigtail connecting to one of the Vanos solenoids. It's got that pigtail connecting to the intake air temperature sensor. And last but not least, it's got this connector going way down under the intake manifold. I forget what that connects to. But this is long enough that I don't think we have to mess with it. And also, I think this one might be long enough as well. We're only going to move the injector harness just a little bit. However, this one I'm going to go ahead and disconnect just to be safe. And it's really easy to disconnect. You just squeeze on this little metal clip here, and it pulls off. Here's a close-up of that. You squeeze it like that. I wish the injector connectors were that easy, but you actually have to take that little metal clip and you have to move it off of that little tab on the injector. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but right in here, that little purple part right there, that's actually part of the fuel injector. This metal clip is actually holding onto the fuel injector right here. So we got to take this metal clip and we just have to move it out of the way so it's not clipped onto that tab anymore. Basically, I'm just going to use a pocket screwdriver, and you just take that little guy and push it over a little bit. Just like that. And we have to do that 11 more times, because there's 2 tabs on each injector. Alright, the injector harness is loose. By the way, I've seen people comment that you can just squeeze the connector and it makes the metal clip come loose. My engine is not like that. You can see I'm squeezing on this thing and it's not making any difference. It's not like, for example, this connector, where you can squeeze on it and you can see it unlocks. These injector connectors don't do that. So you have to actually take the ends of the clip and push them over like that, so they unclip from those tabs on the fuel injector. Anyway, the injector harness is out of the way, and next we're going to remove the fuel rail. Now the fuel rail has a total of 4 bolts. They're all 10mm. There's one here, and then there's one here, and then there's 2 more here and here, or back there somewhere. Alright, the fuel injection rail is loose. The next step will be to pull out the rail with the injectors attached to it. However, there is a chance that some of these injectors might pop loose from the rail anyway. So I'm going to put down some rags to catch any fuel that leaks out. Alright, we got our rags in place. Now it's time to pry the injector rail with the injectors in it off of the engine. Now to do this, I'm going to use, this is actually a trim panel tool. Probably not the best tool for the job, but it's the tool I got. So I'm going to make it work. We're just going to get this up underneath the base of the injector, and we're going to carefully work it loose. Do a little seesaw action, some careful tugging. There we go. And there we have it, folks. The injector rail is loose. Of course, the next step will be to remove the injectors from the rail. Each injector has a little metal clip that holds it onto the rail, and we're going to remove those little clips with our pocket screwdriver. Where did our pocket screwdriver go? Alright, here's a closer look at those little clips, like this one right here. We just pry that little guy off with our pocket screwdriver, and of course we do the other 5 as well. Now, of course, it goes without saying, when we loosen up these injectors, all the fuel that is still in the rail is going to drain out. So, good idea to have some rags here. Alright, the stock injectors are out. Okay, so this was unexpected. I was going to show you how to install these little clips onto the new injectors. And then I figured out that they don't actually fit. So, I'm just going to install them without clips. By the way, did I mention this is not a tutorial? And I don't recommend you do what you see in this video. Just saying. Anyway, I don't think the fuel injectors are going to go anywhere. I mean, it's not like they're going to fall down into the intake manifold. And the fuel injection rail is going to keep them from coming up. So they should be fine. Oh, another thing to note. These injectors, they will fit into the stock intake manifold. It's the same diameter down here. Also, they will fit into the stock fuel rail. That's also the same diameter. However, you may have noticed already, this injector is a little bit taller than stock. If you look at the locations of the O-rings, the top O-ring, now look at the bottom O-ring. Here's the stock one, here's the new one. There's a bit of a difference there. This means that when these injectors are installed, the fuel rail is going to sit higher. And that's going to make a gap between the fuel rail mounting bracket and the spot on the intake manifold that it bolts to. So we're going to have to install spacers to take up that space. Oh, one more thing I almost forgot to mention. Since the fuel injection rail is going to be spaced higher up, the stock mounting bolts, that's this right here, is not going to be anywhere near long enough. Thankfully, I have a nut and bolt collection. So I was able to find some bolts that were the right thread pitch, but they're a little bit longer. If I remember correctly, these are metric M6 bolts. Anyway, yeah, about those spacers. We also need spacers under the fuel rail brackets. And for those, I'm going to use, wait for it, DEEZ nuts. Yep, that's right, I'm using DEEZ nuts to space out my fuel injection rail. They look nice and pretty too. Anyway, these are about the correct thickness to make up the difference between this and this. Alright, we have the fuel injection rail bolted down, and here's a close-up of the mounting hardware. Yeah, so here is one of those nuts I used as a spacer, and of course the longer bolt to bolt it down to the intake manifold. So now you can see how that goes. Alright, now all we need to do is clip on the fuel injector harness. Like I mentioned earlier, these fuel injectors have the same type of electrical connector as the stock injectors, so this will just clip right on, just like that. And of course I have to do the other 5. Okay, the next thing we need to do is to purge the air and any remaining fuel out of the fuel system, to get the air and the old gasoline out so that we can get fresh E85 in. Alright, to purge the air and the gasoline out of the fuel system, I'm going to remove the Schrader valve on the fuel injection rail. Now the Schrader valve has a cap, we just untwist it, like so. There's our Schrader valve. And to remove the Schrader valve, I'm going to use this nice little tool on the end of my pocket screwdriver. You take this and insert it into the Schrader valve, and you turn it around until, there we go, and now you just unscrew it. There we go. Oh, and I'm going to use a piece of clear tubing and an environmentally safe fuel container to catch any fuel that comes out. And after I put the E85 in the tank, I'm going to hop inside the car and turn the key to cycle the fuel pump, and that will pump all the remaining fuel and air out of the fuel system. We'll do this a few times just to be sure. Okay, we got all the air purged out of the fuel system, and some of the gasoline too. Hopefully all the gasoline, but I guess we'll find out when we go to start it. Anyway, the next step in the process will be to reinstall the Schrader valve into the fuel rail. And I'm going to turn the key again with the whole system buttoned up, just to see if we have any fuel leaks. Alright. Hey, I'm going to set you guys up on a tripod, and I want you to watch the injectors and see if anything leaks out. Let me know in the comments, alright? Thanks. I did see a little bit of fuel around injector number 1, but I'm thinking that may have been fuel that leaked out when I had the Schrader valve out, because it's right above there. But all the rest of them are completely dry, and off camera I got annoyed by an airplane. Off camera I put a rag around the injector, and then I turned the key one more time to prime the system, and the rag came out completely dry, so I don't think that injector is actually leaking. So anyway, at this point I should be able to start the car. Of course, it does not have a tune loaded, it's not going to run perfect, and I'm not going to try to drive it, but I should be able to start it and let it idle. Oh, and off camera I decided to reinstall the cabin filter housing, because I'm that confident, or maybe I should say overconfident. I'm going to set you guys up on a tripod, and let me know if the engine explodes, you know, for safety. Hey, it fired right up. Honestly, I thought I'd have to finagle with it to get it running right, but it fired right up and it idled fine. Okay, now you're inside the car with me, and she's idling right around 700, 750 RPM, which is good enough. And the air-fuel ratio, of course, that's not going to be correct because we're not running gasoline anymore, but that is close to stoichiometric, and that's actually where it should be at idle. So that's cool. That means the injectors actually got the fuel delivery pretty close. I'm only going to have to do probably some minor fine-tuning of the fueling tables. So that's cool. And of course we have good oil pressure, we have we still have a lingering cough, and we got good voltage too. Awesome. And here we are back at the engine bay. Those injectors are a little bit loud, or at least I think that's the injectors. Interesting. Okay folks, I have the laptop hooked up to the BMW, and I'm going to load up my experimental E85 tune. Basically all the tune does is it adds a couple degrees of timing in the high octane ignition table. Once again, this is just an experimental tune. It's probably going to need some fine tuning. Alright, looks good. Now we need to reset the adaptations. You always have to reset adaptations after you load up a tune. And then we get to go drive it. Actually, I should go to the gas station and put some more E85 in the tank. When I put in the E85 from the gas can, there was still a little bit of gasoline in the tank. So I want to put in some more E85 to dilute that gasoline. Okay, so here we are at the gas station, putting E85 into our E46 BMW. Just another day at the office. Hey guys, I'm doing a voiceover for this part because there's a lot of wind noise. I have the windows rolled down because it's 80 degrees outside in January. Welcome to Florida. By the way, the AFR gauge looks like it's doing something funny, but it's not actually doing that. That's the camera. You see, the frame rate of the camera doesn't match up with the frame rate of the display on the gauge, so it makes the gauge look funny. Anyway, I got to drive the car around and it went pretty well. It idles fine, and the part throttle drivability is fine. Unfortunately, I did not get to try wide open throttle yet, so I can't say anything about that. Also, I kept an eye on the air fuel gauge, and at idle and during part throttle cruising, the AFRs are fine. However, I noticed on throttle tip-in it goes a little bit lean. So I think I need to make the acceleration enrichment a little bit more aggressive. But aside from that, the drive went fine. So I think this is a great start to the E85 experiment. Of course, it'll need some fine-tuning, but I'll figure that out as I go. Anyway, that's it for this video. See you next time.